everyone, and welcome to Hangout for Hope, your spiritual pick-me-up that's just the right amount of time for this moment in time. And yes, I did get a haircut. I'm sure that you've noticed that our perceptions can skew the way that we view reality. That's why it's important to hear and to learn about a subject from multiple and different points of view. Because if we live in a skewed reality, it becomes that much more difficult to heal completely. Remember, God loves you, and God loves the person who holds the opposite view of you. So if God loves them, we too are called to love them. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to take on their views of life, but it does mean that you can respect them and treat them with honor, and honor their point of view in consideration of yours as well. Tonight, we're going to continue our series, Forgiving What You Can't Forget by Lisa TerKeurst. This third session of 6 is entitled The Divine Echo. Now, I must admit, at first glance, I kind of scratched my head at this title. But then I listened to what Lisa meant. When she says the divine echo, she's pointing out that we are made in God's image. And as image bearers, we are to fill the earth with the evidence of the goodness of God and the glory of God, to echo the Lord that we follow. And the more that we remind each other of who we really are and whose we really are, the more of God's goodness and glory will echo throughout the earth. Tell you what, let's explore this more as we watch together.
We can't change what we've experienced, but we can choose how the experiences change us. That's our statement to hold on to this week. And honestly, it's a statement that's helped me to hold it together when I'm tempted to crawl back in my pit of pain. How we view the events and the people involved in circumstances that hurt us in the past determines how these experiences change us for better or worse. For example, if trust has been broken, it's easy to start perceiving no one can be trusted. Or if we have a string of hard circumstances, we can find ourselves saying, of course that would happen to me. This is just how my life always goes. But we have to be careful because perceptions can sometimes be very wrong. Our perceptions can skew the way we view reality. And if we live with a skewed reality, we can't possibly heal completely. We've got to remember just because we think something is true doesn't make it true. I learned this lesson in kind of a humorous but truly unexpected way recently. My friend Meg is an amazing cook. She's an amazing friend to have. And one day, she was going to cook some soup for me. And she said, Lisa, I think it's time that you embrace eating organic vegetables. And I said, Meg, I really don't have a problem eating organic vegetables, but are they really better for you, or are they just marketed that way to make them more expensive? But Meg convinced me they're wonderful for you. So we need to do this soup, and we need to make it with organic vegetables. So the soup she was making was broccoli and cauliflower soup, which doesn't sound particularly awesome, except when I ate it. Y'all, it was so amazing. I don't know what she put in this soup, but all I know is I ate it. All I could think about was, I've got to have another bowl. And I also noticed that there was some kind of particular combination of spices in it. And I just thought, man, Meg knows everything about cooking. So I ate another bowl. And then after lunch, I kept thinking about the soup all afternoon. And so about 5 o'clock that day, I decided I'm going to have another bowl. And then after I ate that bowl, I decided one more bowl. So by 6 o'clock, when my kids finally came over to eat dinner with me, I'd had 4 bowls of this soup. But I rationalized it's organic, so it's healthy, so it's all good. So my kids went over to the stovetop and ladled up their own bowls of soup. And as they were looking at the soup, they started to look at me and then look back at the soup and look at me. And one of my kids said, "Mom, have you eaten this soup?" And I said, "Oh, you guys, have I eaten this soup? This is the most amazing soup. Honestly, I have eaten 4 bowls of this soup." And that's when they started dying laughing. They took out their phone and they took a picture. And you know how on the screen of your phone, you can just kind of spread a picture so that you can see it? Well, this is what they showed me. You guys, those black dots in the soup, they were not spices. They were bugs, like antennas and legs and creepy looking creatures floating in my soup. I called Meg. I said, "Meg, the soup had bugs in it." Now, not only had I enjoyed the soup, but I had instructed Meg to make extra soup for my friend Amanda, who'd had surgery. So she and her family, they ate the soup too. Meg said, "Lisa, it's fine. People who eat organic vegetables, they just know you don't use pesticides. There's just going to be some bugs in the soup. You don't worry about it." Meg, I'm worried about it. Meg, I am about to go to bed tonight with a belly full of bugs, and that is not okay. As long as I looked at the soup and I perceived that those dots floating in the soup were spices, I ate lots of soup, y'all. I ate lots of bugs. Indeed, we don't always perceive reality. Sometimes reality is a lot different. You know, when we start to connect the dots of our story, like one of the chapters you read to prepare for this week, I talked about a revelation from Adam and Eve that really helped me. But today, I don't want to just connect the facts of our story. I want to start correcting them. These are some of the most helpful truths I've learned in this whole journey because they've taught me sometimes my perceptions of people, no matter how true I think they are, they don't always line up with God's reality. So let's go back to Genesis and first take a look at the ingredients God used to make Adam and Eve. Here's what you read in chapter 6 of the book. Adam and Eve knew they were made by God, fully and wonderfully special, even though the actual ingredients God used to make them were seemingly so very humble and basic, dust and broken off bone. They don't seem like the most promising of beginnings. Those ingredients are seemingly void of any potential. When we think of dust, we often think of what's left behind after something gets broken, or what needs to be wiped away after too much neglect. And an exposed rib bone is one of 24 others like it, hidden under flesh and not seen until life no longer exists and decay has done its work. Left on their own, these ingredients would amount to nothing, insignificant, unacceptable, but chosen by God and then breathed on and touched by God, they become the only part of creation made in the image of God. They were nothing turned into the most glorious something. They were made to be a reflection of the image of God. These people, these image bearers, made an invisible God's image visible. So, first, we've established that Adam and Eve, they're not just dust and bone, but they're also breath of God, the touch and design of God, made in the image of God. But the second thing I want to point out in Genesis is that God said he would make a helper suitable for Adam, which begs the question, what did Adam need help with? Now, theologians much smarter than me have theorized this. Logically, because God made Adam to work the garden and take care of it, maybe he needed help with this work. Or because God made Eve uniquely able to carry children, maybe it was for her to help bring forth life. I think both of these are correct in the case of Adam and Eve. But what about us today? Not every woman helps her husband in his work, and not every woman has a child. But God did say it's not good for the man to be alone. He needed a helper, and he described that helper as suitable, or some versions of the Bible say fit. And it's in the meaning of this word that I found incredible insight, Because as a woman, I want to know, what am I supposed to be helping with? The Hebrew word for suitable is neged, meaning what is in front of you, in your sight, before your face, in your view. So this word suitable gives meaning to the kind of help that Adam needed. He needed a visual, something in front of him to view. This seems to me to be a reflection, but not like a mirror reflecting only what you place in front of it. No, it's more like a reminder that what's standing in front of him is a reflection of God's image. It seems Eve, in being a helper suitable for him, was to be a reminder of who he was, a human made in God's image, a reflection of the glory of God and the goodness of God. There are two things to notice here. First, it must have been good for Adam to be reminded constantly of who he was, a man made in the image of God. And surely Eve would have needed that same reminder that she was also made in the image of God. And together they were to fill up the earth with the glory of God, not just to be fruitful and multiply it with children, but to multiply the evidence of God himself. Now, let's look at Genesis 1:28. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it." To be fruitful and increase the population is pretty obvious. That means to have children. To subdue the earth was the work that they were to do. But don't miss that middle statement. They were also to fill the earth. So what are they supposed to fill the earth with? Well, as image bearers, they were to fill the earth with evidence of the goodness of God and the glory of God. The more that people remind each other of who they really are, the more God's goodness and glory echoes throughout the earth. This is the divine echo. And while this certainly applies to married people, it also applies to every human, because every human is made in the image of God. That's you and me and every person with a beating heart. And the enemy hated every bit of that divine echo by humans made in the image of God, proclaiming the goodness and the glory of God. He couldn't stand the sight of the image bearers of God being reflections of a glory he'd been so desperate to steal for himself. The enemy, Satan, was once the wisest, most beautiful angel of all the angels God made. Let's look at Isaiah 14, verses 13 through 14, and find that it records the evil that entered into him. You said in your heart, "I will ascend to the heavens. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the mount of assembly, on the utmost heights of Mount Zaphon. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." Lucifer, that wise and beautiful angel, he didn't want to serve God. He didn't want to just give God glory. He wanted God's glory to serve him, magnify him, and lift him up as the Most High. So God cast him out of heaven, and shame became all he could then reflect. He's Satan, our enemy, the accuser, the father of lies, and the author of shame. Let's look at one other passage in Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 17 through 19. Your heart became proud on account of your beauty, and you corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. So I threw you to the earth. I made a spectacle of you before kings. By your many sins and dishonest trade, you have desecrated your sanctuaries. So I made a fire come out from you, and it consumed you, and I reduced you to ashes on the ground in the sight of all who were watching. All the nations who knew you are appalled at you. You have come to a horrible end and will be no more. I know those are hard verses, but imagine how enraged Satan became when he saw the man and the woman standing before one another. magnifying the glory of God, reflecting it to one another with the ability to multiply it and magnify it and proclaim it all throughout the earth. As the two image bearers of God stood there naked with no shame, Genesis 2:25, they were the only part of his creation that were created not by God's spoken word, but by personally investing his breath, his touch. They knew they were unique, different from all other created things in the way that they could know God and know each other. And they stood there before each other naked because they could and they should, so that not one bit of the glory of God would be hidden. Adam looked at Eve with what I imagine was probably the purest fascination and admiration, completely void of even the slightest hint of disapproval, disgust, or division. Then Adam spoke life-giving words over the woman. And from there to the end of Genesis chapter 2, she is no longer called woman, but rather wife. I take this to mean she gave herself to Adam in full naked union, and the two became one, a union so beautiful, so full of the glory of God, so absent of the tainting of sin or the taunting of Satan. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. Genesis 1:31. God declared them exceedingly and abundantly good, and they became an echo of that goodness back to God and reminders of it to each other. Their design in the image of God declared to the world, God is worthy of praise. And their design declared to each other was, remember who you are. You are of God, from God, made in his image, loved from the depth of God's unfathomable Father's heart, treasured beyond imagination. Satan no doubt heard the echo, saw the adoration from which he was excluded, felt the weight of praise and glory that would never be his, and hated it all. All he had to add to the conversation was accusation and lies. But without sin, humanity couldn't recognize his chaos as evidenced by the absence of shame. Psalm 4:2, how long will you people turn my glory into shame? So it's no wonder at all that the enemy, who was desperate to steal God's glory for himself, went after these people made in the image of God. He went after the part of God's creation that held the most potential to bring God the most glory. And if the enemy could get people to sin, then he could, in fact, turn the glory of God into shame. There's no better way for people to get caught in a trap of shame than for the enemy to deceive them around an unmet desire. For Eve, it was the fruit she believed would give her unusual wisdom. People are often found wanting. It's not because God isn't providing, but usually it's because God isn't providing in the way they think he should, or as fast as he should, or the desire stems from a past that they've not yet let God heal from childhood. These desires from legitimate needs not met, left unhealed, can sometimes become ravenous appetites that at some point will come out in their adulthood. Or maybe people are just sometimes so wounded in a place so deep that the pulse of pain inside this place, it just screams for relief. The enemy is subtle, introducing illegitimate ways to get legitimate needs met with the slightest hints of compromise at first. Over time, if this thinking isn't course corrected, they may be eased into a place where sin doesn't seem nearly as dangerous as God warned. It actually can feel quite justifiable, like, I deserve this, or I'm mature enough to handle this. This script can play on repeat inside of our minds. And since there's reasonable reasons, it can easily lead people to think, well, maybe this isn't so wrong after all. Besides, who will ever know? So we take the bait. Or, in the case of Adam and Eve, they took the bite. It's sweet to the taste until it slices them open with raging regret. The sin not only opened their eyes to their nakedness and made vulnerability something to be covered, but it also opened their ears to the most vicious accusations. The enemy used their nakedness, both their bared body and their bared emotions, against them. He smelled their fear and he drank it in like liquid motivation. The enemy basked in their belittling. The people no longer saw all that was glorious about how God created them. They looked down or looked across and they saw nakedness as unacceptable, and they attempted to cover what made them vulnerable under a broad, veiny fig leaf. Then they distanced themselves from God. They pointed fingers. Blame drew a sharp line between them, and the man and his wife felt the soul-crushing weight of shame. Shame is the opposite of glorifying God. It is the evidence of the work of the enemy, an enemy who loves to recruit others to help destroy this person, tearing them to shreds, beating their soul black and blue by highlighting the worst about them. Shame's words are accusatory and condemning. Past decisions are gut punches. The anthem of shame is this: you are what you've done. The worst of what others say about you is true. What you did is all you'll ever be. If the enemy can diminish someone's image down to something that they've made for themselves or done to themselves, he will be able to devalue their dignity and devastate their identity. It's so much easier to believe that you're nothing when you forget you were created by the very breath and touch of God himself. Strip a person of that, and they'll feel like nothing but dust in the wind and bone in the grave, insignificant and dead, hardly the light of the world illuminating the goodness and the glory of God for all to see. Seeing people as made in the image of God, loved by God, magnifies God. Seeing people as enemies, shamed because of what they've done, magnifies Satan. This isn't denying your hurt. This is denying Satan the ability to turn your hurt into hate. God can take that same hurt, verging on hate, and turn it into forgiveness. So if I personalize Psalm 4:2, I'll start to ask myself, Lisa, how long will you turn God's glory into shame? Walk in forgiveness by changing how you look at those who hurt you, and change how you see yourself, Lisa. Change how you see all people. Maybe this could be our personal prayer. Lord, forgive me. Forgive me for forgetting to honor your image, both in myself and in other people. And forgive me for forgetting to look at others through the reality of who they really are in you. This isn't just a truth for a husband and a wife. It's how we should look at every human. Now, if I were you, I may ask the hard question. Lisa, would you still say the same thing if Art never returned home? I pray I would, because seeing others made in the image of God, it isn't based on their choices. It's based on God's truth. Again, I know there are complexities to people's actions that hurt us, yes, but forgiveness helps uncomplicate the hurt inside of us. We don't need to wait for other people to do the right things before we make right choices that honor God. So, in my own life, I've turned and looked at Art now for who he is, not what he's done. Those things are real, and some of them are really, really hurtful. And while those choices are his to own, his to confess, and his to answer to God for, they're not the essence of who he is. Does he still have issues? Yes, so do I. But those are for us to work out with God as we go along. That's the work of sanctification, but not identification. What we've done is not who we are. Art is a man made in the image of God. He's not just dust. He's also breath of God. This isn't some weird psychological trick bathed in denial. It's a choice. It's a choice. It's a choice I make to look at art through the lens of love and let God's truth bring the picture into full focus. Maybe it's the most dignified choice that I've made along this whole journey. As I see myself for who I really am, and as I see him for who he really is, I can accept him and I can accept myself. And you, dear friend, you are more than what's happened to you. How might you be able to see someone in your story for who they really are, not just what they've done? You don't have to start with the person who hurt you most in the world, but start with someone. Take it slow. Take those steps towards seeing past the dust and past the bone. Search for the breath and the touch of God in them. And even more importantly, search for it in yourself. You are made in the holy image of God, designed by God, loved by God. And I truly feel God entrusted me with the high assignment today to echo that to you. This assignment is a privilege, and you're a gift. As a fellow image bearer, I take this opportunity to take the hatred and the hurt Satan tried to drown us in and use it to shame the deceiver and the accuser of our souls back to hell where he belongs. This is the divine echo of the glory of God. I echo it to you today, and for the rest of my days, I'll echo it back to art. This is vulnerability. There's no performing. There's no secrets. And if I cry in the midnight hours, he wakes up, literally. This is the safety that we never really had before. Emotion, tears, honesty, freedom to discover what's inside without worrying that it will label us with issues or scare the other one away. Just plain humanity set before another who is fully aware of their own frailties. And best of all, the ability to just be with one another without the pressure of feeling like we need to fix one another. That's God's job, after all. God is in charge of the fixing, and that frees us up to just do the living and the loving together.
So what did you think? We learned today that Adam needed a visual, something in front of him to view. Eve was to be a reminder of who he was, a reflection of the glory of God and the goodness of God. So let me ask you these things. Do you typically view people as made in the image of God, only if they make choices that you say are godly choices? How might this idea of honoring others as being made in the image of God and loved by God, no matter what they've done, change the way that you interact with them? The truth is, we're all created and loved by God. Why do you think echoing this truth back and forth to each other is so vital, especially now? Maybe think about this. What are some practical ways that you can do this in your life? Just some things to think about the rest of this week. Thanks for joining us tonight on Hangout for Hope. Join us next week as we continue with this series with next week's topic, There's Always a Meanwhile. I hope to worship with you at Advent ELC soon. Worship is this Sunday, both in person and online, and it is our Camp Song Sunday, so make sure to wear the flannel. For more details, visit us at adventelc.org. But until next time, I'm Pastor Aaron Lane reminding you to take care and to give care in the name of the one from whom all blessings flow. Have a great rest of your week.